The weather's fine for flying. The fog has gone to bed. There's such good visibility. You could see victory ahead.
John Crawford Kanberg was born on June 7, 1925 in Chicago, Illinois. He enrolled in the military and was sent to Biloxi, Mississippi for basic training. After basic, he went to Jonesboro, Arkansas, where he enrolled in Arkansas State College. He was in pilot training school until he found out more gunners were needed. He was then sent to Kingman, Arizona, a lead school in elite gunnery. From there, he was moved to Tampa, Florida, where he was stationed at Dill Field, a military air base where he was assigned a crew.
Until that time, we didn't know who we were going to be flying with or anything. And at Tampa, we were assigned a crew. And for instance, they had a big football field, and they would say, everybody that's number 10, you go over there, and that would be, let's say, a waist gunner. Well, they kept doing that for every number until you got all 10 people on the plane. And then that constituted a crew, and they got a number of crews from that football field. And they had a good class, and you never did anything unless you were with your own group. You lived, took vacations together, leaves, I should say.
Yeah. When Kanberg showed up to training camp, he was told that they needed more gunners, so he became a turret gunner. Kanberg's job during the war was on a B-17 bomber. The B-17s during the war were nicknamed the Flying Fortress. Kanberg here describes his job more specifically.
Ball turret gunner on a B-17. And for those who don't know what a B-17 is, it replaced, for all practical purposes, the B-24, which was the main bomber that the U.S. had. And the 24 was vulnerable because it wasn't nearly as well armed as it should be, and so the Boeing people decided they were going to find a new, and they invented and started and built the B-17. And the B-17 was the Flying Fortress. And it was gunned. It had 10 people on a crew originally, and then they got rid of 2 of them because they didn't think they needed 2 waist gunners. And the bombardier, who was right up the nose of the B-17, he could drop his bombs on the smoke that came up from the planes in front of him, so that they eliminated the need for bombardiers, which nothing was that accurate anyway. So if you were off by half a mile or whatever because of wind or other factors, that's part of the cost of war.
Missions could be exciting adventures for these airmen. Here Kanberg talks about his first.
Our first flight on a B-17 from our air base in Sudbury, England, was we were going to be a lead plane. And of course, none of us knew what that meant, or none of us knew what we would be doing, except it sounded like, we'd be the first ones over the target, and we indeed were. But the lead plane in these raids was what they call a chaff plane. And chaff is like tinsel on a Christmas tree. And it was exactly like that. It had strings and everything, and we had little triangular packages about a foot long, I'd say, and filled with these pieces of tinfoil or whatever. And it was our duty to go in front of any of the planes at 30,000 feet, or they were usually bombed between 28 and 31,000 feet. But it was important to know the exact footage, and with the people on the ground having the luxury of being steady, we had to get some way to confuse them. And so the lead plane would go over, and as they approached the target, they would be dropping this out of the bomb bays, out of open windows, not windows, but open areas, and just filling the sky with this, so that with the radar, excuse me, and the purpose of radar is to shoot a radar beam up, and when it bounces off of the airplane and it comes back down, ground crews have the equipment to find out how long it takes to do that, and as a result, they can get the actual height in terms of feet that those planes are. So if we can fill the sky with things that are going to make those radar instruments go kaflooey, it gives the following planes, beg your pardon, following planes a target to do, and you're so busy you don't even see what's going on around you because everything's behind you, for one thing. I probably should have told you, if you didn't know, the ball turret was hung underneath the belly of the plane. And to get into the ball turret, you couldn't do it when you're on the ground. You couldn't do it when you're going to land. So the hatch would come open inside of the plane. And by the way, at 30,000 feet, it was 60 degrees below zero. So if your electricity or any of your connections went out during the flight or at any time, you couldn't stay up too long until you had to go down and get oxygen and also get cold warmer. You could, getting back to the shaft plane, we got rid of all our chaff, and then they made a turn and headed back to base, and we could then see all the planes that were coming in to bomb this target. And we didn't realize that at least the men in the crew, like the tail gunner, the waist gunner, the ball turret gunner, the engineer, the Army guy, and the navigator, bombardier, co-pilot, and pilot, they could all see that. We were at our guns and ready, but we felt we escaped all problems because nothing had happened. And you could see this flak bursting in the air, and it looked so tiny, you wondered, how could this, but then of course it would spread out, and a lot of the things that weren't smoke were also hazards. As a consequence, our plane was hit, I'm going to say many times, numerous times. I couldn't even tell you all the things that were wrong, but we didn't know it. The pilot just kept riding and driving, and then he announced over the radio on the intercom, we're going to have to drop down to 10,000 feet because the oxygen is not working now, and you can't stay for prolonged periods of time over 10,000 feet. So he told us that, and then he also made the announcement that, and we didn't have to have an announcement, we could see it. One of the engines was stopped and the propellers weren't going. They had to take that into place and compensate for that. And as we got down, the one thing that we were told was bad at this time, because it was January 8th of 1995, that we were told that because the Air Force of Germany was so battered and so they were out of fuel, they were out of this, that they really couldn't go in and attack a squadron of 50 B-17s, for instance. That's too much gun power in the B-17s.
Yeah.
So they would try to pick off planes that were having trouble and whatever, and that was us. So by that time, we started all getting a little nervous and panicky and scared. We had never been taught how to use a parachute. We had never been taught how to get out of a plane that was up at 30,000, or in this case, 10,000 feet. We had come down to that, and the second engine went out, and pretty soon they said, we're going to have to jump. And that was a goose pimple raising experience, because I'm 18 years old at the time. It's something that you didn't expect.
Yeah.
And so we all got out. We had one extra man because they had two of them in the waist throwing the chaff out, and normally on a bomb run you just have one guy in the waist and a tail gunner and then the ball turret. And the ball turret could go 360 degrees, and it could go up level with the plane or go down to the ground. So that's why it replaced the B-24 that didn't have any kind of a ball turret. Now we bailed out at 10,000 feet, and as you went down, I can't tell you how many different thoughts you had, because I'm sure everybody is different. But I know in my case, you kind of swinging, and if you've ever been, I'm sure you have, swinging in a playground, for instance, and you pump and you get going so high, and pretty soon, at least with me, it used to always be, oh my God, if that swing's going to come after inertia is gone, right down on top of, slack, and I'm going to in the ground, and I'm going to be killed in the playground. Well, that's the way it felt in the parachute, because it was, I had no control over it, and yet I knew it was going to one time just go up there, but it never did.
When Kanberg finally landed, he was dazed and confused. Also, Kanberg was scared. Here, Kanberg talks about his feelings after he landed.
So when we hit the ground and there was about a foot of snow, I saw one of the other guys in our crew who was closest to me, and he was probably 200 yards across from this field, or in the field, I should say. I was kind of in a tree. And we got together, and then we were trying to decide which way we would go. If there was any sign of life. When we didn't have to worry about it too much, there was a Jeep in the distance, and they were holding machine guns up in the air and shooting a couple times. And we said, oh my God, I hope this is an American patrol of some kind. And fortunately it was. And they were thinking we were German, because the Germans were clever enough so that in the summertime they used parachutes that were different colored, like camouflage suits. And this was winter, and our suits, American suits, were just all white, which is what I brought some here that you could see, that silk. Well, I'll show you those in a few minutes. But so they thought we were German, and we thought they were American. Well, unfortunately, we were both Americans, and we were this other guy, Whitey Shield was his name. He was from Detroit. He and I discussed in the 30 seconds or a minute until this Jeep got right upon us. Who in the heck is it? Did the Yankees win the pennant? Or we heard all these things that we were going to be quizzed on to make sure we were American. Well, anyhow, that passed, and they took us back, and it took about 7 days to get back to our home base.
With Kanberg going on so many missions, he was bound to win at least a few minor awards. Here, Kanberg talks about the point system and how the medals worked.
Anyway, got the missions in, and they had a point schedule. For every 5 missions you were on, you got the air medal, and the air medal was worth, I don't know, say 15 points, whatever it was.
Kanberg seemed to have trouble bringing planes back. If a plane didn't come back, it wasn't counted as a mission. Here he briefly describes that.
3 missions that we had, this one that I just described and 2 others, we didn't bring planes back. We ended at Belgium one time, we ended in London. We just had to come back from London and take a truck back to our base. And then we got in, the crew got in, I think, around 32 missions, if I'm not mistaken, and I think I got in like 28.
Kanberg later learned that his parents were sent a concerning note. Here he describes this note and his reaction to the news.
In our home base, we didn't even get credit for a mission, because you don't get credit for a mission unless you bring a plane back.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, we were there, and the bad part of this was that my parents got a telegram from the government saying that I was missing in action. And of course I wasn't, and we didn't know that they got anything like that. But now that I'm a parent, I realize how terrible that must have been for my mom and dad to get a note like that. And
throughout the war, people needed information on what was happening to their boys. Some people were luckier than others in this category. Here, Kanberg describes how he kept in touch.
Very lucky there too. There was a group of gals in our senior class at Davidson that a lot of them had boyfriends that were in the Navy and some in the Air Corps and any department, and they decided what they would do is form an Davidson magazine, and so you'd write letters to them, and they would publish them, and you'd hear from people who were like my best friend was in the Signal Corps, and my other best friend was in the Marines, but they would all get this, and you'd find out, and you'd keep the date up, dealt with all of them. Yeah.
The war could be a depressing event. Thankfully, organizations like the USO were created for entertainment. Here, Kanberg discusses what he did with his leisure time.
The USO was active. Every once in a while, you did have a lot of times. We in the Air Force would get or Air Corps would get a 2-day leave or a 3-day leave. You couldn't fly too often, actually. So we'd go into London.
Throughout the war, friendships were built. The people in the same group came to form close-knit bonds. Here, Kanberg describes some of his relationships with the boys in his group.
Camaraderie. We did everything as a group. The 4 enlisted men and 4, it ended up crews were 4 enlisted men and 4 officers. The officers lived their life and did things and went places we couldn't go, but we were just close-knit as the officers, and we were all close-knit with one another. It was just that the status was that officers were treated differently, and everybody understood it, I think.
Throughout the war, soldiers had many concerns. They didn't know when they would return, when the war would end, etc. Here, Kanberg talks about his concern.
I think not knowing, you'd think about how long this could go on. You heard of the 100-Year War, and you might think, oh my God, is this ever going to happen? Is it ever going to end? And I think that was probably the hardest part of the worry about. If we could only just be sent home, and after so many years or something, and send some other people in. I think that would have to be my biggest worry, if that's what the question was.
We would like to thank Mr. Kanberg for his cooperation on this project and in his interview. We would also like to thank him for dedicating some of his years to serve his country. Mr. Kanberg has told us the story of a true American hero. Without his bravery and the bravery of the men he served with, the war wouldn't have had the same conclusion. His story of pure courage is touching and really makes a person take a look at veterans of war and salute them for their efforts against the evils of the world. The turret gunners on the B-17s helped control the air for the Allies and showed their huge hearts while hanging from the outside of planes and risking life and limb while riding the B-17s. With their markings and bombings, the soldiers riding these flying fortresses helped make sure that World War II ended in a victory for the USA and their allies. These men showed true patriotism and true love for their country and the countrymen. We have been moved by Mr. Kanberg's story and now can better appreciate the efforts of our boys in World War II.